Is this a covert trap or a technical genius that will change the 2025 season? What happened to Hamilton and Ferrari in Spa has left everyone asking. Are we seeing a violation of the regulation or the birth of a new era in brake technology? The most striking was a new rear suspension, designed to radically modify the way the car behaves in critical phases such as acceleration and braking. In this new architecture, the upper arm was displaced several centimeters down, which increased the so-called anti-quat, a mechanical principle that reduces the compression of the rear axle under acceleration. This modification, although subtle from the outside, significantly altered the dynamic equilibrium of the car. What was sought was greater stability when leaving curve and, above all, a more rigid platform to improve tensile traction, one of Ferrari's weak points in 2024. To this was added a second innovation: new generation brake discs and brake pads developed by Brembo, with an unpublished micro-perforated geometry. This system not only promised a greater initial mordant when applying the pedal, but a more efficient thermal management under stress. This detail is critical of circuits such as Spa, where the brake system must operate in extreme thermal ranges due to sudden braking such as the Source, Les Combes or the final bus chicane. The premise was clear: less fatigue, more consistency, more confidence to the limit. But there was a problem. This technical combination, more brakes, changed the car's DNA in two vital areas: aerodynamic balance and pedal sensation. The rigid suspension modified the way the diffuser worked at low speed, altering the pilot's aerodynamic references. And the new brake system, having a more aggressive initial response, demanded a total recalibration of the driving style. It wasn't just a matter of getting used to it, it was about releasing how to stop. Leclerc had already lived a negative experience with this system in Canada. There, a sudden loss of adherence in braking sent him to the wall. Even so, Ferrari opted to mount the same package in Hamilton's car in Spa, seeking to take advantage of his supposed advantages in a circuit that hardly penalizes any inconsistency in braking. This is the true context of the scandal. Ferrari did not improvise in Spa, but activated a part of the plan that had been developing months. The risky thing was to do everything at once and in a race weekend with changing track conditions, in one of the most demanding traces of the calendar. It was not a deliberate trap, but it wasn't prudent either. It was a bold play, loaded with internal pressure, technical ambition, and a pinch of arrogance. And when Hamilton lost control by bus stop, what broke out was not just a spin. It was the outbreak of a conversation that had been taking time inside the paddock. A conversation about how far a team can go in its search for innovation before crossing the invisible line that separates the legal from the questionable. The turning point came in the sprint classification of the Belgian Grand Prix. It was Hamilton's first serious attempt with the new technical package in real competitive pressure conditions. Until that time, the British had worked in long batches during free training, testing different brake and suspension configurations, but never squeezed the car 100% in a lap thrown with low fuel load. When he finally did, the result was dramatic. In the braking of bus stop chicane, one of the most technical and demanding sectors of Spa-Francorchamps, Hamilton blocked the rear axle when stepping on the brake, immediately losing the control of the car. The car was violently destabilized, turned on itself, and was off track. The session ended in position 18 of the SQ1, without the opportunity to advance or correct the course of the weekend. What seemed like a simple pilot error became a suspicion trigger at a technical level. Hamilton soon giving statements. Visibly frustrated, he said the problem was not his, but of the car. More precisely, he pointed out that the behavior was almost identical to that Charles Leclerc had experienced in Canada with the same component. He talked about an unexpected reaction, of a loss of control that had not anticipated, even a completely different feeling that had in long batches. These types of statements, coming from a pilot of his caliber, lit the alarms. Some analysts pointed to a possible irregular modification of the braking pair. The hypothesis was simple but dangerous, that the Brembo micro-perforated system was generating an asymmetric response in the braking distribution, something strictly prohibited by the technical regulations of the FIA. Others, more technical, suggested that the new design of the albums altered the progressivity of the braking by heating the pills, generating what is known as brake snatch or sudden bite. In both cases, the final effect was the same, a sudden loss of rear train adhesion that could cause a trunk without prior notice. Before the scandal, Frédéric Vasseur, Ferrari team manager, went out. He affirmed that the piece was completely legal and that it had already been approved by the technical commissioners of the FIA. He insisted that he did not alter the braking balance actively or violated any rule on passive mechanical components. However, he also admitted that the system required more test laps so that pilots could adapt to their behavior. Vasseur's response, although institutionally solid, did not completely clear the doubts. In modern Formula One, the concept of legality is often as interpretive as the regulations themselves. A piece can be within the paper regulation, but generates sufficiently unusual behavior for the rivals to perceive it as suspicious. In this case, more than an explicit infraction, what was hinted was the existence of a gray zone, a strip of normative interpretation where Ferrari would have found an advantage that others still do not understand or do not dare to replicate. What fueled more suspicion was the fact that only Hamilton used the new system in SPA. Leclerc, who had released him in Canada, returned to the previous specification after his accident in Montreal. That difference within the same team showed that even in Ferrari there were doubts about the stability of the technical package. Why then risk with Hamilton in a circuit like Spa, knowing that the dynamics of the new system were not yet understood yet? The incident became the subject of central conversation in the paddock. Rival team engineers began to ask for more exhaustive reviews, while technical analysts discussed whether Ferrari had found a revolutionary evolution or simply precipitated by implementing a change not yet matured. In a matter of hours, what began as a spinning was transformed into an veiled accusation of illegality, and an argument on to what extent a team can push the limits of engineering without crossing the line of what is allowed. The technical advantage offered by the new Brembo system lies in an internal geometry completely different from the conventional. Micro-aguaces that cover the surface of the disc are not distributed uniformly, as has been done in standard configurations for years. Instead, Ferrari and Brembo developed a pattern that varies the density of the perforations depending on the radius of the disc, optimizing the thermal dissipation just at the points of greatest friction. The objective was to achieve a more stable temperature after return, allowing a more aggressive braking without the system overheating. In extreme conditions such as Spa, this could make a difference of up to 15 degrees Celsius in the disc nucleus, enough to avoid the phenomenon of the brake fade in long batches. But true complexity appears when analyzing how this thermal stability affects the braking pair. The colder or hot a disc, more or less friction generates in contact with the pill. If a pilot slows down with the same pressure level but the system delivers a more forceful response for being in the optimal range, the car will stop more abruptly. In the case of Spa, Hamilton applied its standard braking reference, but the system reacted more aggressively, causing a sudden blocking of the rear axle. This difference between expectation and response was what generated the error, not a failure of the car itself. As for the suspension, the redesign of the upper arm not only impacted traction as thought. It also subtly altered the way the car transferred side loads into combined braking. Spa is a circuit where many braking are made in curve, and a car with an altered mass distribution can become extremely unpredictable if the pilot does not adapt his style to the new balance. The increase in the anti-quat effect, in combination with a more rigid rear axle and a modified vertical load, resulted in a less progressive car. Faster, yes, but also more difficult to control in limit conditions. The controversy lies in the fact that, although all these modifications are legal according to the regulatory text, its joint application generates side effects not provided by the regulations. It is not an active system, which would be illegal, but a passive evolution that, when interacting with other car components, produces dynamics that can be seen as hidden assists. The FIA explicitly defines that any system that modifies the behavior of the car in a non-linear or assisted by algorithms is prohibited, but says nothing about passive designs that generate unexpected behaviors. In this ambiguity is where Ferrari has played his letter. The SF25 with this configuration does not violate any direct rule, but tests the way in which the FIA understands concepts such as symmetrical pair or stable platform. In fact, an informal review of the system has already been requested, not because it is illegal, but because a dangerous precedent could sit if other teams begin to follow the same path. This raises a disturbing question. To what extent does innovation justify the risk? Because in Formula One, innovating is not only to find something new, but to make it work before anyone else without being sanctioned and, preferably, without crashing the car in the attempt. Ferrari opted hard on Spa. And although the play did not go well in the short term, it is very possible that this technology refines, it is better understood and return more strongly in the following races. If that happens, the line between trap and innovation could become even more thin. These are the questions that will shape the next chapters of the season. So if you are interested closely how this possible technical revolution evolves, sign to the channel, activate notifications and leave us your opinion in the comments.